Welcome back to part 3 of Machrihanish, Britain's Area 51. Today we're going to talk about two interesting aspects of the base that we haven't discussed before. Firstly, its current use and investment. In the same year as the devastating Chinook helicopter accident, the Americans pulled out of Machrihanish. The RAF eventually decided to mothball the base, and it went into limbo. It turns out that millions are being spent to upkeep a closed base. A Scottish friend who has a scientific background was part of a team applying a stealth coating to the runway. I've learned that this refurbishment process carries on today, where the runway is stripped of its secret coating and a new one applied. Some interesting trivia. To strip the old coating, they sandblast it, but sand would be very inappropriate for aircraft use, so they use ground up walnut shells. In its mothball state, the base started looking sad, and there was a campaign by local people to use it as an economic development area. Jobs are rather scarce in Argyll. They have a long tradition of shipbuilding, so a company building the pillars for large wind turbines moved in and used the apron area as a foundation for building these large buildings for steel rolling mills to build the wind turbine pillars. Eventually the whole airbase was leased under a consortium called MAC and is now used for various economic things. Because I was making these films, a school friend from Campbelltown, sent me these pictures inside the base. They show the old US Navy SEALs area, which is currently being used as a gun club. He also managed to get this photograph, which is part of the underground lift shaft access, which is still closed for public access. He also said the deal with the current leaseholders is the military can have the base back at any time, and there's plans afoot to return it to an active military base within a number of months. That planning has been done. And what about aircraft still using the base? That continues. It has a small civil airstrip. Remember, it has a 10,000 foot runway. To stop excessive taxiing times, the civil planes use just the end of the runway, and there's now a displaced runway arrows until the very end section, which is used for the Highlands and Islands transport planes and also Medivac for airplanes that take you to hospital in Glasgow if necessary. But the military do still use the airport. It's often used as navigation and training exercises, and in fact they practice taking over foreign disused airports by coming to Machrihanish, bunkering down in the old hangar buildings and then leaving in the middle of the night, and that has been seen lots of times. But there's more. The MOD continue to maintain a Category 3 VOR, that's a VHF omnidirectional rangefinder. VORs are the backbone of navigation in the air. If you lose all your GPS signal, say in a time of conflict, VORs should still work. And Machrihanish has a very accurate, very high powered one, not only on the base but right at the end of the runway. So that means it's still a useful diversion airport. Any Northern European commercial plane that has problems crossing the Atlantic, the first airport it would meet would be Machrihanish, and its 10,000 foot runway and VOR system for landing. Perfect. But now I'm going to go back to the Cold War era and actually discuss another issue that my father had about Machrihanish. In 1975, the Soviet Union had SS-20 missiles. So under the Thatcher and Reagan era, Britain was chosen to have cruise missiles. Over 400 were deployed in Europe. 96 were sent to Greenham Common and 64 to Molesworth. This caused a big controversy.
Cruise is the missile system that comes on the back of a lorry.
The thing about cruise missiles is that they're actually a terrible deterrent. They've turned the table into a possible tactical nuclear weapon.
There are 4 missiles in the first lorry. The buttons which fire them in the second. In time of nuclear alert, they will set off to secret launch sites deep in the English countryside.
So let me explain that. An intercontinental ballistic missile can reach its target in, say, 10 minutes and be an instant source of destruction and a fantastic deterrent, if you like nuclear weapons. A cruise missile flying at 400 or 500 knots will take over 3 hours to reach the Soviet Union, the perceived target in the 1970s, and that is hardly part of MAD, mutually assured destruction. It is a potential weapon for tactical use. In Britain there was a huge outcry. The cruise missiles were seen passing Woolworths in small English market towns, and the women of Greenham Common held a vigil against them for years.
Since November 1983, this so-called RAF base has been home to the 501st Tactical Missile Wing of the United States Air Force, and the place where the American military prepare for nuclear war. These are the roads most frequently used by crews. A typical 80-mile round trip takes death speeding through the streets of Newbury and Hungerford and the ancient borough of Marlborough, past Woolworths, W.H. Smith's, the Castle and Ball Hotel, and almost through the dormitories of the famous school.
The cruise missiles were kept in underground nuclear-hardened bunkers, but they had a convoy of vehicles, large articulated semi-trucks, as you'd say in America, that needed to emerge and go to an undisclosed rural location outside of the base. The routes that the cruise missile convoys took had to be designated, and they were called ESRs, or Essential Service Routes. Remember that name, because in Campbelltown, the only connection to the outside world is on the A83. From Machrihanish, the A83 goes up the west coast of Kintyre, and then eventually it crosses over to the east, and then over a pass called the Rest and Be Thankful, and drops down into Glasgow via Faslane and Holylock, the 2 nuclear submarine bases. For years, the A83 was worked on. From the gate of RAF Machrihanish way up the west coast of Kintyre, all the bends, all the rocks were removed. This was a massive project, and I remember it. It used to drive my dad, who drove up there all the time, crazy. He was a government man, and he didn't like waste, and he saw Strathclyde Regional Council as possibly wasting a lot of money on fixing bends in roads that didn't really need straightening. It turned out that they were getting their money because the A83 was designated as an essential supply route, a euphemism for a cruise missile convoy friendly road. So where did this ESR route actually start? Oh, at the gate to RAF Machrihanish. Personally, I believe that Machrihanish, because of the protests at Molesworth and very much at Greenham Common, was seen as a potential alternative cruise missile base for the United Kingdom. And I also think, because it had existing nuclear bunkers, it could be used by Holylock and Faslane for Navy nuclear storage. The most amazing thing that has come out of this short series of films is you. I've reconnected with some school friends from Campbelltown, and I've had quite a lot of interesting comments that know more than I do about how the base was used. As always, I do say the truth is out there, and I mean it. So if you want to know more about Britain's Area 51, Machrihanish, Chinook helicopters or cruise missiles, go and look in the comments below. There are half a dozen very interesting telltale comments. The good ones are often flagged by me with a little thumbs up from Professor Simon and maybe a reply saying interesting or thank you or get in touch. Go down, read them if you want to do your own research. And write to me and tell me what you know about Britain's most secret base. The truth is out there.